everyone, I'm Allison.
I'm Bryce.
And we're Better Half Reviews. And today we're talking about Oros. It's a game designed by Brant Brinkerhoff from Aesc Games, and it's coming to Kickstarter July 20th, 2021.
In Oros, you're a demi-god, and you're manipulating the landscape to create mountains, and then sending out followers to build sacred sites. Through this, you gain knowledge and wisdom, become more powerful, and earn points to hopefully win the game.
Alright, so let's check it out. Here's the setup of the game. This is the first player token. And the map is set up the same way every single time. And you have volcanoes out and different land formations. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Everybody starts with 2 of their followers on their board on the Build One Sacred Site and Journey Follower space. All your wisdom caps are at the lowest level on your board. And you have 2 followers here off to the side, and we'll talk about that later. So on your first turn, you're going to take one of your 3 leftover followers and place them somewhere on the map in one of the starting locations. It's the one with the circle. So I can place it anywhere, I'll place it here. With your last 2 workers, these are going to be the actions that you take. So wherever you place a worker, you will take that action. Once you have placed your workers and taken the following actions, then it will be the next person's turn. So now let's go over the actions. So for example, this space says shift all land tiles in a row, not including mountains. So if I place my worker here, I can shift all the tiles in one row, one space. So that could be up and down or left and right. So for example, if I shifted this row, it would shift 1, and this one would come all the way back around. However, since the world is round, you can do different types of shift.
For example, if you wanted to shift this outer ring, you could shift that over 1 either direction.
Note the arrows. You could shift likewise. If there is a mountain in the row you want to shift, you cannot shift it. Mountains are immovable, unless you unlock a certain power. The next option is to move land tiles 1 space. Currently, my option is to only move exactly 3 tiles. So if I move these 3, I can move them exactly 1 space over. Other things you can do when you move tiles is you can collide tiles together. So if I took these 3 and shifted them exactly 1 space, this one would move here and collide with this. The 3 and 1 tiles would combine and become a 4 tile. So I would place the 4 tile here, and there was a volcano, so that volcano will stay. The goal for making land tiles like this is when you combine 2 4 tiles together, you can form mountains, and that's when you can build your sacred sites. We'll talk about that in a moment. So for another example of moving land tiles 1 space, if I move these 3 up, they would all collide with these. This is a 2 and 3. It would form a 5, but 4 is the highest number, so it'll form a 4 and a 1 volcano. The same would happen here. A 2 and a 3 would form a 4 and a 1 volcano. And then this middle is 2 4s coming together. That is the highest you can go in order to form a mountain. And mountains are where you can build your sacred sites that gain you wisdom points for the game.
Just remember that these tiles are connected by this line. So if I wanted to move these 3 tiles up 1, could move those there, and this 3 would collide with this 1, forming a new 4 space.
So the next action is erupt or form a volcano. So let's say that I had a 4 volcano here. If I choose to erupt this one, that would form more land. So if I erupt it, it has to fill up the spot where it's at currently. So this is a 1, and the highest number you can get to is 4. So then this would become a 4, and then the volcano would have 1 left over. So if I want, I can have it flow this way, and I can orient the tile however I want. You can only cross over land, so I would put it like this. Or I could choose to have the volcano erupt overflow come here and change this into a 2. And because of how I've placed this, this is all connected now. The next option is send 1 to study or return up to 2. So if I choose to send 1 to study, I place my worker here, and then I have to choose one of my other workers on the board to send to study. They can either go here in the study spot, or if I had one of the sacred sites built, I could send him to study at my sacred site. if I choose to return up to 2 to study, then I can return him and place him somewhere on my board, and then I would gain 1 wisdom for each follower I returned. And when you gain wisdom, that moves up your wisdom caps 1. You would decide which one to move up. We'll talk about this a little bit later.
The next action you can do is journey followers. Currently, I can journey 1 space, so I can choose a follower and move him 1 space over.
Or if I wanted to, I could also move him here.
But beware, sometimes there's water between land tiles, so you wouldn't be able to journey over the water.
And if my worker was on the sacred site, if I were to journey, I can't just move over to the next tile, you have to step down. So this is the lowest level, I would move 1 space this way. Something else to note when you're journeying followers is if you're up on a sacred site, you have to take 1 step down for each of those sites. So my follower is at the temple, that's the highest you can go. So if I can only journey 1, I can only step down 1 space. Each of these would be 1 movement, 1, 2, 3, and then I could move off. So for now, I'm limited to 1 movement. I could only step down here.
When journeying, you can't end your journey on a tile with another player, so I couldn't move this meeple over to this tile with the yellow player. However, if I had multiple movements, for example, if I had upgraded this wisdom cap, I could journey across an occupied tile, so I could go from here 1, 2 spaces. Similarly, when you journey down from a sacred site, you can't end your movement on an occupied sacred site. However, if I had enough movement to cross over somebody, I could journey down off a sacred site. So I could go from here 1, 2, 3 if I had 3 available movements.
And now we have the build 1 sacred site action. So if I place my follower here, then I could build one of these sites. And you can only build on a mountain. So right now, this is the only mountain we have. I have my follower here, so I can choose to build. The other players have already built a monolith and a shrine, so my option is the temple. Because there can only be 1 of each type on a mountain, and you can only have 1 of your own buildings on the mountain. So I couldn't build a temple and a shrine on the same place. So I build a temple, my follower goes up here, and every time you build a sacred site, you'll move up 2 on the Ziggurat track. If I were the first person to build, I'm not here, but just let's say that I am, I would move up 2. But for this example, the blue player has already built, so they would be at 2. And then the yellow player has built, so they would move up 2. But blue is currently in that spot, so they would move up past it. They would go 1, 2, skip over to 3. And then for me, since I am building now, I would move up 2. 1, 2, but that's taken, I move up to 4. The Ziggurat track is helpful because those numbers also represent points at the end of the game. And so every time you build, depending on the site that you built, you get a certain amount of wisdom. So if you built a monolith, you would earn 1, a shrine would be 2, and a temple is worth 3. So I built a temple, I can receive 3 wisdom. So this is where you're going to upgrade your board, and that can give you different abilities or score you certain points depending on what you're going for.
If you are on a sacred site when the next level is built, for example here, yellow was on his shrine when orange built, yellow would also gain a wisdom.
But if the yellow player wasn't occupying that space when the temple was built, they wouldn't gain the extra wisdom. The follower has to be physically there. So now I can choose to gain 3 wisdom caps. You can choose to just do all 3 in one spot, or you can split it up. Depends on what strategy you're going for. Let's talk about the board here. Alright, so on your board, leveling up can get you certain bonus points towards the end of the game. So on these tracks right here, if you level up your wisdom cap so far, this would earn me just straight up 3 victory points at the end of the game. Or this one, 7 victory points at the end of the game. And every time I would use this action, I would be able to ascend 1 on the Ziggurat track. Same thing goes for here if I level this all the way up, here, and if I go all the way up to here, this just helps with movement. And you'll notice it says that you can journey across water edges, or you can journey to occupied spaces. And so with here, this gives you different options. So with shifting the land spaces, I could shift 2 spaces instead of 1, 3, or this one would allow you to shift mountains. which no one else can do unless they obtain this wisdom cap up to this level.
When you raise your wisdom cap, you also retain the abilities below. So if you did only want to shift one, even though you have 3 spaces unlocked, you could just shift one.
And so here with moving the land tiles, this lets you be a little bit more selective in your choices of moving. This is exactly 3, exactly 2, or 1 in any direction. And finally, you could even use 3 tiles to form mountains with the erupting or forming volcanoes. This lets you erupt 2 or 3 at a time, or a special power. This is actually going to change for the final game, so I won't go over that right now. And then this will allow you to have more followers on the map. And then this special ability will let you return up to 3 from study, thus getting you extra wisdom. And we talked about this already. And then finally, this side of the map is just straight up points dealing with your sacred sites. So say in the game I built a lot of monoliths. It would be advantageous for me to use my wisdom to bring up this track for the monolith, because then I would get 6 points for each monolith. In every sacred site, there's 3 of each. So then we have these followers here on the side. They are followers that you can unlock throughout the game, but this follower does not unlock, it has this arrow, unless you get all of your wisdom caps up to this next level. Once I get to that point, then I've unlocked this follower, and they must be placed somewhere on your board. So it takes up a spot, which could be a disadvantage, but it also gets you 1 point per follower on the board at the end of the game. Same goes for here. If I raised all my wisdom caps up to this next level, I would unlock this follower, thus getting 2 victory points for each follower on the board. As you're moving and shifting things throughout the game, whenever your turn ends, and if one of these spots that are circled in red has no tile on them, you're going to put one of these starting tiles on it. It's the one with the circle around it. It's the island, just to make sure there's not too many gaps going on. And something else, if someone moves up the Ziggurat 1, 2, and they land on one of these red spaces, that is going to form number 2 volcanoes on the board. So every space that is circled in red will now gain a 2 volcano. In this case, there's already a 2 here, so I'll just trade these out and put a 4 down. Same goes for here, and you're done with your turn. Once someone goes all the way up to the top of the Ziggurat, that triggers the end of the game. You finish the round and then count up your score. I won't go into heavy detail for the scoring, but you can get scoring for your different attributes if you've leveled them up, for your different sacred sites and how many you built, and sometimes for even how many followers you have on your board, plus the amount of points you got on the Ziggurat. Person with the highest knowledge points is the winner. So in a 2-player or solo game, you will have a slightly different setup going on some of the boards. Since Oros requires at least 3 different people to play because of the 3 different sacred sites to be built, you will need to have an Automa player. So this is what the Automa board looks like. It's just the back of the regular player board. And they'll have a deck of cards. So we've got a little cheat sheet for how the Automa works. Shuffle up the deck of cards. And when it's their turn, you just simply flip the card over and follow the steps. So typically the solo player will have 3 different things going on. They'll have their first action up here, something in the middle with the board, and then possibly ascending up the Ziggurat for the 3rd action. So this one says, in section C, so on this side of the board, there's section A, B, C, and D. It says in section C, build the lowest sacred site possible on a mountain and place a follower. So this is section C, and they're labeled here. So there is a mountain in section C, so they'll place whatever the lowest site available is. Since there's no sacred site, it would be a monolith. And then they'll place a follower. Since they place the monolith, that gains them 1 wisdom, and you'll match it up with whatever's on here. So this says 1, 2, and 3. Since they gained 1, this would move up 1, and it matches with a symbol on the board right here. Moves it up. And most of these are just straight victory points for the Automa. So then here it says shift row 2 spaces. It shows you the row. And we're going to move it over 2. So we'll just pretend that there's something there. If we were to shift this row 2 spaces, and it shows you the direction, we'll go 1, 2. This wraps around over to here. And now it says we move up the ziggurat once. Say, for example, on this turn, if I had built a shrine higher than the monolith, if I had built up a temple, that would mean I would gain 3 wisdom. I would gain each of these sections. Since it's 3 wisdom, you gain the following. So I would move this up 1, the follower symbol up 1, and the mountain symbol up 1. You only ascend up the ziggurat for the Automa if it says so at the bottom of the card. Some of the cards don't have any ziggurat ascending, and they have different powers and things that they can do. They can form mountains, they can send followers to study or return followers, and there's even some Automa who remove tiles from the board or remove players from the board. Each of the Automa have a different deck to create a unique experience. They range from friendly to competitive and to aggressive. So if you're feeling a little bit more skilled in the game, you can play against the Raging Fire, who is the aggressive one. So in a 2-player game, you'll need 1 or 2 Automas. In a solo game, you'll need 2 or 3 Automas. Otherwise, the game is played exactly the same. The only difference is the Automa deck and how the Automas move up the track. All right, so that's how you play the game. Let's talk about how we feel about it. Bryce?
So, Allison, what are some of the pros?
You're throwing it back on me?
Yep.
Okay, he usually goes first. Okay, so the pros. It's Oros, okay? Anyone who's been paying attention to Better Half reviews for like the last, 6 months knows that I love this game. I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep that for like the end, but I can't help myself. This game is awesome. It has so much strategy. It has so much variability because there's so many different strategies on how you can try to win the game. There's different AI demi-gods for different player counts. So if you're only playing with 2 people, you can play with 1 or 2 demi-gods, and all of those are different. And plus, it just looks gorgeous, and it is so fun to try to just do good at this game. Oros, I love it. Okay, sorry, your turn.
Well, kind of taking a step back from all of that, I think the rulebook is written very well.
Oh yeah, that too.
It explains everything really well. It has examples of some of the harder concepts, and I'm kind of going to get to one of my cons right now. One of my cons is when you shift tiles and when you move tiles is not always intuitive. Sometimes when you move tiles and you're like, well, I'm going to pick these 3 and I want to move them like this way along this arc. Sometimes not all the tiles move that way along the arc because you're moving them up, and the one tile moves along the arc and then the other tiles like flip down to the bottom of the board. It gets confusing, but the rules address that situation and have an example.
It is a little bit of a brain burner with that, some of those actions, yes. So that takes time to get used to.
It takes time to get used to, but I think the rulebook does a great job laying out a lot of those confusing situations.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just a mind bender because you're trying to form, land around a planet on a flat board. So obviously, yeah, it's gonna that is a little bit of a learning curve. And as you play it more, you can be like, oh, I can manipulate the land like this. Like, there's been times where we're playing it and I'm like, I haven't thought about doing that. Oh, I need to do that next time. So yes, there's loads and loads of different strategies with this game. So I guess I will say my one con for this. I know, shocker, I have a con for Oros. It can be a little fiddly with the pieces. I've played it on Tabletopia a ton, so like the first time I played it in person, I was like, oh yeah, I gotta like pick up these tiles and shift them over. So just be aware that like you'll have things on top of tiles. You gotta be careful when you're moving it over. I mean, it's not bad, it's doable, but it can be a little bit cumbersome. That's like my one and only con that I can think of currently.
Yeah, I can agree with that, especially when you can move or shift mountains, and the mountains have like 3 sacred sites and 3 meeples and a volcano or 2. It's just a lot on that little tile, and you're just like, okay, I want to shift this over to. Let's hopefully everything stays intact.
I mean, I don't usually have too much of a problem where it's like one piece falls over, but yeah. And I know we have the prototype, so not everything is like snazzy and fancy. So I'm sure it'll be a little bit smoother on the actual game. So yeah, that's my one con. Okay, I said it, got it over with. Let's go back to everything good, okay?
Well, Allison did mention this already, but I really like the strategy of this game and the strategies you can choose. Each thing that you can do can be upgraded, and so you can upgrade different paths or different tracks depending on how you want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And you can challenge yourself and be like, well, I usually upgrade, say, moving and, followers journeying and being able to move. Maybe I'll try to upgrade volcanoes this time and see, how that plays out. Because at least for me, that's a strategy like I never try, but I think it would be interesting to see how that goes.
I've done it before, and it actually can work out pretty well. But yes, so I love that there's different ways to play the game. So something else that I really enjoy with this game is you only have 3 actions on your turn. And so you're like, man, that's really limiting. And then the key with it is your followers, wherever you place them, that's your action that you can take. But you have to be strategic on who you're picking up to move around because you don't want to be blocking the action you want to do next. So that one is also like a little bit of a mind bender because you're like, wait, hold up. I needed to do this, then journey, then I can build. So I love just even on your board is a game within itself.
Well, and then a good strategy, at least in the beginning, would be sending out a ton of people to study.
Gain that wisdom.
Well, that frees up a lot of actions.
That too.
But then when you bring them back from study, you gain a lot of wisdom, but you are also blocking a lot of your actions again.
That too.
And so you're like, oh man, do I want to bring them back now? They're going to block something I really want to do this turn. Mm-hmm. Do I bring them back later? It's a fun little puzzle. So
good. So if you like having that big mind puzzle of a game, this game is fantastic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the solo and stuff maybe later, but I'm going to mention it here too. This is a fantastic solo game. Each AI comes with their own demi-god Automa deck, and so they're all slightly different, and so they have different strengths and powers and things that they go for and to mess with your board. And it is so awesome. And their board is a little bit different than your player board, but it's pretty intuitive on how you do it. And yeah, it's just amazing. Okay. I don't have... I'm just going to keep talking, okay?
And those Automas are actually good for a 2-player game. Mm-hmm. You can use a third one. As
or a fourth one.
Or a fourth one, yeah, as a third or fourth player. And it just kind of changes up some of the dynamics of your standard 2-player game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a necessary thing because you can only build one of each type of sacred site. True. So you have to have at least 3 players. You can have 1 or 2 real players, but then you need to have at least that one other AI or 2 if you're playing by yourself. So that could be a con for some people if you don't want to have a fake player in your game. You need at least 3 people to play this game. But I feel like the AI does a great job with, changing things up, and it's pretty easy to run.
And with the AI, it can add a little bit of a take that element.
Yeah.
To where maybe 2 players are trying to just do their own thing and not cross paths, but then that AI throws a wrench into everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I honestly like it with the AI, just because it adds kind of some spontaneousness to the game.
That is true. So Oros, there is a lot in this game. There's a lot of different rules and strategies and nuances with how you can manipulate the land. This game is fantastic, and it's coming to Kickstarter July 20th, 2021, and you can bet that I'm going to be there day one, ready to click back it. Unless he gives me a copy for free. But anyway, so this game is amazing. If you like to strategize and think with interesting choices, go for it. This game is awesome.
Yeah, like Allison already said, this is a gamer's game. I wouldn't suggest it too much as a gateway game or like a family game to play with little kids. It'll go over their heads. But if you want to sit down, have a great experience, thinking through some challenging puzzles, this is definitely the game for you.
And if you're kind of on the fence and you're not sure what you think about it, this, I would liken it kind of to like Paladins of the West Kingdom. It looks like it's a small game, but it's a big game in a small box, and it has lots of different strategies. So if you kind of like Paladins of the West Kingdom and all those different options and combinations, you would like Oros.
And even if you don't like Paladins of the West Kingdom very much,
You'll like this anyway, right?
Paladins for me is probably the third ranked out of the West Kingdom games.
Spoiler.
But I love this, so...
There's that too, okay. So yeah, you have two different opinions, and we're both saying you'll like this, okay? So this is Oros from Aesc Games, and all of this is done by Brant Brinkerhoff. That's something else that I wanted to mention. He did the art and the gameplay, the everything. I mean, obviously he had help along the way, but he's like a one-man show, and that's in and of itself is amazing that one person came up with all of this. So go back it. Have I said that enough? No. Yes.
So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out our merchandise. Links for everything, including the game, will be in the description below. And this has been Better Half Reviews.
I'm Allison.
I'm Bryce.
Happy gaming.
Have fun.
So go back it. Have I said that enough? No. Yes.